So we're going to talk about planting trees in North Dakota to reduce energy costs. We all know about the aesthetic benefits of trees and the look that they can bring to our landscape, the beauty that they've got, but there's also some savings in energy that you may not know about. Reducing our heating costs in the winter, as well as reducing our cooling costs in the summer. So we'll talk about winter heat cost savings. Of course, winter's a big one here in North Dakota. Seems like it's definitely the longest, most brutal season that we've got here in North Dakota. We can use trees as windbreaks, right? So not just to make it more pleasant in our backyard for our picnics and such, but we can also use those to reduce the wind and reduce the effect that that has on your heating costs in your homes. We'll talk about some statistics on the heating cost reductions that they can bring. And then last in this section, we'll talk about some examples of North Dakota hardy evergreens that you could plant that will give you these benefits. So a reduction in wind speed equals a reduction in heat loss. So if we've got a nice big windbreak out there with some North Dakota hardy evergreens, we can reduce the wind speeds coming through around our yard, around our house, and reduce the effects of that, the drafty windows, as well as just the wind pulling heat away through your insulated walls and everything on your house. The effective distance for windbreaks is 2 to 5 times the height of the tree. So an example of that, if we've got a 30-foot tall tree, anywhere out from 60 to 150 feet past that row of trees is where the biggest benefits in reduction of the wind is going to come from. A well-placed windbreak can reduce heating costs by up to 25% according to the USDA. So if you look at reducing your heating bills by 25% every single month in the winter, that can add up to be a pretty big savings. Reducing those wind speeds coming across just is going to allow it to not pull the heat away from your home as quickly. So over a 10-year period, the Department of Energy says that is up to around $2,500 in savings, which, I mean, to me, $2,500 is pretty good savings. You're not going to be, going out and buying a brand new car with that kind of money, but we could certainly use an extra $2,500 in our pocket. Large evergreens, like we talked about, offer the most benefit for the winter because they're trees that have the foliage still on them in the winter to create the windbreaks for us. A few examples of North Dakota hardy evergreens. One of the North Dakota natives is the ponderosa pine. So we can get a pretty good size out of a ponderosa pine. They're one of the faster growing trees for North Dakota. Once you get one of those established, you could look at putting on 12 to 18 inches of growth in a year, which is pretty decent growth rate for an evergreen tree in North Dakota. Again, they're native to a good part of the state, so we know they're going to do well here. They're good and cold hardy. They'll make it through our drought years that we've got pretty well. If you've got some newly planted trees, you're always going to want to make sure you get a little bit of water on them 1 or 2 times a week for the growing season. But once they get established, those ponderosa pine are pretty tough trees. Black Hills spruce is another one. Not a North Dakota native, but a native of our neighbors to the south, South Dakota, of course, given the name. Black Hills spruce. It's actually a variation on the white spruce. They've got real dense growth to them. A little bit better disease resistance than the popular Colorado spruce. So they're another great selection for your windbreaks or, even as an ornamental tree or the aesthetics around your landscape. Rocky Mountain junipers, that's another North Dakota native. So these are probably one of the most drought tolerant evergreens for North Dakota. Real good selection. There's also a whole lot of different varieties of the Rocky Mountain junipers that have different forms, different colors, and that to them. So if you are looking at a space where maybe you've got limited real estate to be able to fit some evergreen trees into, and so you're looking for something that has a little more narrow form, or maybe you're looking for something that doesn't get 80 feet tall, you want to stay with something on the smaller side. Some of the cultivars of the Rocky Mountain juniper would be a real good choice there. You're going to get good drought hardy evergreens. You're going to get, again, the evergreens, so you've got the benefits from them year round. And then you're able to pick from a few different varieties that have colors or the profile habits that you're looking for to fit the space. Next thing we'll talk about is summer cooling cost savings. So we talked about in the winter and reducing our heating costs with evergreens by creating windbreaks to reduce how much heat is being pulled away from our home in the winter. In the summer, we can use some shade trees to reduce how much radiant heat the sun's beating down on our house with. There's also some other cooling effects that come from something called transpiration. So we can reduce our energy uses with shade trees and some other benefits of any tree, really. And then we'll talk about some recommended shade tree species for North Dakota as well. Importance of shade trees. So blocking the radiant heat from the sun. With a shade tree, you could place it on the south side of your home, and then when the foliage comes in the spring and the summer, you've got the leaves, which will create some shade in that space and reduce that sun beating down on the house, reduce how much heat it's pumping into your home, so that can reduce your cooling costs. And then the benefit there is in the winter, when that foliage falls off, you get the benefits of the sun bringing some radiant heat into your home. Plan for shade coverage. We all like to have the backyard barbecues and picnics with family. So placing a few trees in some strategic locations in your yard can make those events a little bit more pleasant experience versus being out in the open. We get a hot summer day and the sun's beating down, and we get that rare 1 or 2 days of summer where we don't have wind. Shade tree can help make things a little bit more pleasant for those days. Strategic placement, we talked about that. Shade trees come in all different shapes and sizes. So getting the right tree for the right space is where we want to get those benefits from. And then that last one there, transpiration. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. But what that is actually kind of the tree breathing and evaporating some of the water that it's stored in itself, which can also reduce the ambient temperature in the air. So the Department of Energy says, again, up to a 25% reduction in energy costs in the summer from shade and transpiration of trees. A little bit shorter summers here in North Dakota than our winters, so you might not save quite as much. But we do get a lot of radiant heat, and we can get some real real hot summer days in there where those energy savings can really be key to making things a little bit more comfortable. Shading 17% of your home equals about $10 a month. 50% gets you about $20 per month. Of course, that's national averages on energy uses according to the Department of Energy. So everybody's results are going to be a little bit different based on where you're at, how efficient your home is, what kind of landscape you've got out there with the trees and how big the trees are, all kinds of stuff like that. But temperature under a shade tree can be up to 25 degrees cooler. So in those areas, it's kind of like the real feel temperature. When you look on your weather apps, you know, they tell you the actual temperature is this, but you know, if you're in the shade, the real feel is this number, and if you're out in the sun, the real feel can be a whole lot different. And that's what they're talking about there with that reduction in temperature in the shade, under the shade of a tree. Of course, your savings grows with the tree. So trees are one of the few things that you can do in your home that will not just grow in value along with inflation, but they literally grow for you. So you plant a 8 to 10 foot tall shade tree today, and 10 years from now, you could have a 30 or 40 foot tall shade tree that of course has much more value to it than it did the day you put it in. Not just because prices of shade trees went up, but because that tree has itself grown. So trees are a great thing for that. Savings of a young, healthy tree can be the equivalent, according to the Department of Energy, of up to 10 window air conditioners. So big benefits there from the shade trees. A few recommended shade tree species. The elms. So there's a thing called Dutch elm disease that's kind of a worry now, but over the years they've come out with trees that are resistant to that Dutch elm disease. A few of those that work pretty well here in North Dakota are Princeton, Accolade, or Prairie Expedition elms. The Prairie Expedition elm is actually, I believe, North Dakota State University introduction. So some of the same teams that Tom works with there at NDSU are the ones coming up with some of these trees that work for us up here, not just in the cold, but you know, the specific conditions that we've got with our soils and our climates here in North Dakota. Another one, a honey locust. Honey locust is a North Dakota native as well. My great-grandmother down by Scranton, North Dakota, I can remember having a honey locust there. And they had these weird kind of brown banana peel looking seed pods in them, which I guess I loved as a kid because I thought they were just the coolest thing ever. I had no idea what these little things hanging up in the trees and then falling on the ground were, but they're the seed pods. They do have some different varieties, cultivars of the honey locust, the Skyline or the Northern Acclaim honey locust varieties do not have the little bitty thorns on them, and they do not have those seed pods. So if you're looking for something that's a little less messy than the native honey locust, one of those varieties might be a good one for you. One of the things that's really kind of neat about the honey locust is the shapes of their leaves give you sort of a filtered shade. So it's a great tree to have in a place where, you know, you're not looking for 100% shade block, 100% block of the sun. You still want to allow some natural light in there. Maybe you've got some landscape plants behind it or around it that still need a little bit of sunlight on them, some partial sun. The honey locust would be a great tree to plant in those spaces because they're still going to allow a little bit of filtered sunlight through. Lindens are a really popular one for using, especially like in boulevards. They like to use them in parks, stuff like that. They've got just kind of that classic shade tree shape to them. Big kind of rounded top. Real big leaves on some of them. They do also have a little leaf lindens, but classic shade tree. A couple examples of varieties: Greenspire, Harvest Gold is one, Redmond lindens. A couple more North Dakota native trees, Bur Oak or Hackberry. Those are a little bit slower growing trees. They can be somewhat difficult to transplant with their tap roots, and most times those trees are sold in container form versus a bare root, just because those tap roots, I think there's a little bit more success sometimes with the transplanting in the container grown versus the bare roots. They're a little slower growing, but man, a nice bur oak, you could get 4 or 5 generations worth of enjoyment out of one of those. And the look on them is fantastic. Great texture on the bark. Of course, they've got the signature oak leaf shapes to them. Big old acorns, very cool trees. Of course, we are all familiar with the cottonwoods here in North Dakota, especially along the river. And great, big, beautiful trees, but man, that cotton can be a pain, especially if you've got a central air conditioning. If you live anywhere that's got a lot of cottonwoods around it, you know, about midsummer, you end up with that big, heavy blanket around the air conditioner of cotton that you gotta clean that stuff out. They've got varieties like the Siouxland cottonless, where that doesn't have the cottonseed, but you still get all the growth benefits, the soil and climate adaptations that cottonwood's got. You just don't have the cotton out there covering everything. We talked a little bit about different shapes and sizes on shade trees and how you want to get the right tree to fit in the right space. There's a few varieties under there where it could be used for strategic placement, maybe a little bit more, I guess some places call them skinny trees, but they have a more narrow or columnar growth habit. Examples, the quaking aspen, which is a native to our neighbor to the west in Montana. Those have a little bit more narrow form to them. Still a great tree for our area. They tolerate our soil conditions. They tolerate our climate conditions very well. Once they're established, they're pretty drought hardy, and they're relatively fast growing. So good choice for something where you want to be able to put some trees in and start getting some benefits in a real short time. A couple more examples of aspen that have even more narrow form to them would be the Swedish columnar aspen, or an introduction from I believe Jeffrey's Nurseries up in Canada is the Guardian aspen. And those have a real tight form to them. So maybe you've got a yard where, you know, you've got kind of a small parcel in a city lot or something like that. The homes are pretty close together, but you want to get a little bit of separation from the neighbors, or you're situated where you've got some west-facing windows or a porch or something like that that's pretty close to a neighbor, and you want to get some shade trees in there to block the sun, but you don't have the space for something that's going to grow huge like the cottonless poplars or a honey locust or a linden or something like that. You could stick one of these Swedish columnar aspen or Guardian aspens in there, and they only get about maybe 10 feet wide, and then something like 30 or 40 feet tall. So you can still get some good height out of them. You can plant them pretty close together and create a real good screen. A couple more examples, still in the poplar family. A lot of these skinny trees are in the poplar family because the poplars naturally have a little bit of that upright form to them. The prairie sky or the Sundance poplars, prairie sky is going to get real large. They can grow up to 50 or 60 feet tall. They still stay pretty narrow, maybe about 10 or 15 feet wide. And then the Sundance is kind of like its little kid brother, where they only get about 30 feet, maybe 40 feet tall, and stay about 10 feet wide. Dakota pinnacle birch, another example of a skinny shade tree. Those stay real tight in form. Not a terrible lot of height to them, maybe about 20 or 30 feet tall, something like 8 feet wide. So those are some examples. Whenever you've got kind of limited space, that you could stick some of those in and still get the advantages that you're looking for. Talked earlier about transpiration and how it can affect temperature, and I told you I would tell you a little bit more about that, and we will here in the next couple of slides and explain what it is and how it benefits, especially urban environments where they can have kind of an urban heat zone where you get a lot of heat that's coming from energy production, or of course our air conditioning units that we've got that make us have cool air in our indoor spaces. Well, they also heat up the outdoor spaces, and when we've got real dense populations, that can become a problem. And if we're able to plant some more trees and other greenery in there, another natural habitat in there, through transpiration, it can reduce some of those effects and kind of bring down those urban temperatures. So transpiration is when a plant, like a tree, is releasing water that is drawn up through its roots out into the air. And what this does is the transformation of that water from a liquid into a gaseous form actually pulls energy or heat out of the air to make that transition from a liquid to a gas. So the water's drawn up through the roots of the tree from the ground when either it rains or we get water runoff from somewhere, or you yourself dump water from the garden hose into your tree watering bag. It gets drawn up through the roots and it gets circulated throughout the tree just under its skin to help all the rest of the parts of the tree grow, and then eventually it gets released back into the air in a gaseous form, and that's called transpiration. Again, more points on the impacts of trees on the urban temperature. We talked about when we've got populations in real close, real high dense populations in urban areas that can generate a lot of heat, and some natural settings with trees and other plants can reduce those temperatures back down. They've also got some impacts on reducing heat-related injuries, dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. So what we want to do is we want to combine what we talked about with the windbreaks and the energy benefits in the winter, and the shade trees and transpiration and those energy benefits in the summer, and create a plan for our spaces that gives us year-round benefits. So by creating the windbreaks, strategically placing those shade trees, so we've got some shade and some cool air in those areas that we need that for the summer. I guess the point here is we've got just kind of one tree standing all by itself, and that one tree isn't going to give us everything that we need for a whole plan. It's going to be a combination of different trees, and really a well-planned approach to get all of the benefits. So that's essentially a good part of the benefits that we get from trees for reducing energy costs. Again, using those guidelines in your own landscape at your own home to create the benefits from the windbreaks and the shade and the transpiration, strategically placing those trees where they're going to be needed for those. If you guys got questions? Sir?
How far away from your house should you plant a tree for shade?
Well, that would depend on, I guess it would depend on the tree and the house as well. But if you've got a south-facing window or something like that, a tree that grows out with a little bit more wide crown might be something, because in the summer, the sun's going to be real high up in the sky versus in the winter when it's a little bit lower on the horizon. But it would depend on how large that tree is eventually going to get in its maturity. Some of those skinnier trees we talked about only get 10 or 12 feet wide, then you'd be able to place that a little bit closer to the home, versus something like a bur oak that, it's going to be slow growing and it might take it a long time to get there, but eventually it gets spread out to be 40, 50 plus feet wide.
Does it go out
Is that-
20 feet from your house, 30 feet from your house?
Well, it would be
10 foot?
half of whatever the mature width of the tree would be. So if the mature width of the tree is 40 feet wide, you'd want to go at least 20 feet out from the house to make sure that you don't have the branches hitting up against the house or hanging over the house where they might become a problem in a storm, something like that. Yeah. Anyone else? Sir?
So how big of a Black Hill spruce tree, pine tree can you transplant and hope it survives?
That would depend on how large of a spade you're able to dig it out with.
Quite a bit of room. And so anyway, my 3 lots that I have behind my house are 180 feet.
Okay.
So anyway, how big would the tree?
No, it would depend on the size of the spade that is digging it, but like a 65-inch diameter tree spade, I think they say with evergreens, you're typically looking at about a 12-foot tall tree, maybe 15 if you're pushing it. Some of the trees that are grown for production on tree farms and the like, they use a practice called root pruning. So what they do is they'll come in and they'll kind of cut along a couple of sides of the tree usually, and they'll cut the roots and separate some of the roots that are out wider further away from the tree, and that promotes that tree to grow new roots in closer and more densely toward the tree, so it creates a little bit more dense, compact root ball on them. And then that allows them to grow a tree to be quite a bit larger and take a smaller spade to dig out a little bit smaller root ball on them. And the biggest reason they do that, one is for keeping things compact in their tree farm, their growing space, but the biggest one is to allow them to dig a pretty decent sized tree, like say maybe a 10-foot tall spruce tree, and only take about a 30-inch diameter root ball with that tree. This can get extremely heavy. 30-inch diameter root ball is probably 1,200 to 1,500 pounds, depending on the soil type. So you can imagine digging up hundreds of those trees, sticking them on trucks to send them from the farm to wherever they're going at 1,200, 1,500 pounds a piece. That can add up real quick in freight costs.
Now,
But
what would you recommend spruce trees be planted?
if you're planting them for a windbreak, something like that, they should be probably 15 to 20 feet center to center in the windbreak. If you really wanted to go very, very tight with them, you could probably get away with planting them about 12 feet apart, and they should still survive for the rest of their lives at that. But they are going to be real tight, where they're gonna end up touching right up against each other, and then wherever they touch up against each other, they won't get new growth because they don't get sunshine in those spaces. But at 15 to 20, they should be happy for the rest of their lives at that. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. This is the first time I've given this presentation. I did have a short article on the subject that we wrote that's on our blog, on our website, so that's where The content came from my research for that short article, but this is the first time, I guess, that I've spoke about it in a public setting. So, thank you for coming. We will be planting or potting up trees downstairs right beside our booth. We're kind of right as you come into the entry doors. We're just off to the left there. So if you guys want to come down and pot up a little Colorado spruce, and you can take it home with you. So, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.